I have never been in therapy, although a lot of people told me I should. But they all are in therapy, and it doesn't seem to be helping. But the people that I know that are in therapy, the ones that are in therapy regularly, are the most fucked up. And I don't see improvement. I mean, maybe it's just a biased sampling of the people that I know that are doing it, but it's the people that, and it's not all of them, but the ones that I find problematic are very self-indulgent. And there's something about going to a therapist and talking about yourself constantly and your problems constantly that sort of reinforces this self-indulgent.
And that's what can lead depression to get worse, sadness to get worse. As you sit and focus on your pain, if you're not careful, especially with teens and kids, it can make the pain, the worry, the feeling of being harmed worse. And I think that's what we're seeing.
But what about the good therapists? Aren't there good therapists that can give you tools to sort of change your patterns of thinking and behavior and move in a positive way?
So if you're struggling with a condition of some sort, a phobia, anorexia, OCD, any number of problems that you want to deal with, therapy can be great. Cognitive behavioral therapy especially can be great. But if you're a teen or kid who shows up bummed out or, just generally kind of anxious, to a therapist, you have a good shot of having that problem made worse.
But why is that? What is it about going to therapy with that problem that's going to make it worse?
Because you're going to sit and talk about your worries regularly. They're not going to say, that exercise is amazing for depression. Study after study. In fact, there have been recent studies showing it's better than antidepressants for a lot of,
1.25%.
I mean, it's amazing, right?
Or excuse me, 1.25, like 1 times better.
Right. Dancing is apparently amazing for, low mood. Now, I'm not talking about severe major depressive disorder, okay? When you have severe chronic depression, you may need to treat it with medication or therapy. But for, low mood, sort of mild to moderate depression, exercise turns out to be better, and it doesn't have those side effects.
Yeah.
But let me give you an example of a teenager I talked to. So I talked to this girl, Becca, is what I call her in the book. But she was a high school senior, and she had been in therapy since age 6, okay, when her parents divorced. She didn't have any diagnosed mental disorder of any kind, but she had regularly been in therapy because her parents divorced, and they said, you got to go to therapy. So I asked her as a high school senior, so what are you working on with your therapist now? And she said to me, my therapist is getting me ready to make friends in college. She's helping me.
Oh, boy.
So we're rehearsing, we're going through my past experiences, and we're talking about how to get me ready to make friends in college.
That gives me anxiety just thinking about it.
Right.
Someone coaching me to go make friends is like, what?
Right. Do you see, this generation feels that it can't do because they've gotten so much oversight and so much needless mental health intervention that they're questioning themselves all the time. They're in their heads all the time.
And what motivated you to write this book? Like, do you have personal experiences with people that are going through this?
Well, 2 things. Like, one is I'm raising 3 kids in this generation. So I wanted to know, why was the generation that got the most mental health intervention, the most therapy, the most psych meds, the most interventions in schools, the most therapeutic parenting, why were they in the most distress? And why were they so afraid to grow up? And we shouldn't see that. They should be the picture of wellness. Nobody worried about anybody's mental health more than we worried about their mental health. And yet they're the picture of despair. So I really wanted to know, what was going on with them. And also, of course, I had written Irreversible Damage, and I knew from that, experience that very often when a young woman would tell a story about when her life went desperately off track, it was with a therapist. And here's the thing. It wasn't necessarily a gender therapist. Most often, it was just your vanilla psychodynamic therapist who was there to talk to an anxious or a little bummed out teen, mildly depressed teen about their bad feelings. And lo and behold, during the course of, regular psychodynamic therapy, they would say, and what are your feelings on gender? And with the therapist, they would go down that route.
Wow. There's a lot of other factors too, right, that's contributing to kids' anxiety today, and a big one has to be social media.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Social media is a huge part of the story. There's no question. I wrote about it in the first book. And, Jonathan Haidt, Jean Twenge have been talking about it for 8 years now. And they've brought rigor and important research to show that has, extracting kids from their social world is bad.
Yeah.
And getting them, making them, getting the dopamine hit, and the anxious, worry about who's going to write me back and when, and then getting the dopamine hit at when they get that response, and that whole cycle. There's no question that plays on our natural sort of, propensities for addiction, and makes kids more anxious. But I think it's part of what we're seeing. I don't think it's the whole story. And the reason I don't think it's the whole story is a few things. First of all, childhood mental health and adolescent mental health has been in precipitous decline in this country since the 1950s. So,
and how do they measure that?
So from, let's say, by every measure, by the way, but let's say take between 1955 and 1988, the rates of adolescent suicide quadrupled. So that's just one measure, but there are many. I mean, we've seen it from non-suicidal self-harm, suicidal self-harm. All of these rates have gone up for adolescents, but they've been in decline for mental health in this, of teens has been in decline for years. There's also some other statistics or some other reasons I don't think phones explain the whole story. One of them is that in 2016, the CDC came out with a report, and they said that 1 in 6 kids between the ages of 2 and 8, these aren't kids with smartphones, between the ages of 2 and 8, 1 in 6 kids had a mental health or behavioral diagnosis. That's a lot of kids. That's a lot of kids with a mental health diagnosis, right?
Do you think that it factors parents with mental health issues? And I think, more adults are anxious. More adults are suffering from anxiety and depression, at least diagnosed anxiety and depression, now than ever before.
I think adults are absolutely passing on their anxiety to their kids. And that actually we're seeing that in, Jean Twenge came out with this book, Generations. And one of the things she said in it is that boys, even though teenage girls have the worst mental health in general, boys from liberal families had worse mental health than girls from conservative families in terms of anxiety and depression. So why should that be? We know the girls are on social media more, right? Mm-hmm. Boys, that's not their thing, right? They're into video games or whatever. But I think part of the reason is what you said. There are certain families that are passing on anxiety about things like climate change. But I also think it shows that it's in the environment we're giving them. We're not giving kids a healthy life. Right? We think that we can give them an unhealthy life and just pour in the mental health resources and remediate, but it doesn't work like that. And then the last reason I don't think that phones totally explain everything or social media is because they're in societies where they use just as much social media. It's not great for the kids' mental health, no doubt, but they have much better rates of anxiety and depression than we do. Countries like Japan and Israel, where kids have more independence, they have more freedom. They're able to take more risks on their own, and they walk home from school. They do all kinds of, jobs outside of the house, like run errands for the family. And they get a feeling of, first of all, short-term joy and long-term satisfaction from being able to take risks, see what they can handle, but also a feeling of efficacy in the world.